Awesome. Let's do this thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for being here. We'll see you on the other side.
We'll Sounds like a plan. Awesome. So thank you, everybody. So this is part two of a three-part series on talking about VPNs. Thank you to our sponsors. I also wanted to take a moment to say thank you to all of the nerd herders that we have on the Discord server. Um, if you go to other Discord servers, a lot of times you deal with spam and hate and scammers and all this other stuff. And these folks are just amazing. I mean, before I can log in to check, they've like found the messages, every channel it was put in, got it all deleted, got the person banned. They just, this would not be as awesome an environment on this Discord server as it is if it wasn't for these folks. So when you talk to them, please say thank you because, we have the environment we do because of them. As for lab requirements today, not much. If you want to kind of follow along, a Linux system that you have sudo access on that's running SSH, as well as admin access on a Windows system, and you'll be able to follow any hands-on stuff that I go through and do. Okay, so let's do a quick sanity check. So last week, we talked about symmetrical key encryption. That's when we have encryption that a single key is used to both encrypt and decrypt. And we talk about how that's very efficient from a CPU perspective, right? We don't take as huge of a CPU hit with that versus other options. But the downside of that is how do I get that secret key to the system on the other side when I don't trust this medium, namely the internet that is between us? So we talked about that last week. We also talked about HMAC. So we talked about hashing, and we talked about how HMAC is simply a hash algorithm plus a secret key that we use to digitally sign data that goes back and forth. So the idea is I take a hash algorithm, I take this secret key that's used as part of my symmetrical key encryption, I run that through a hashing algorithm, I send that to the system on the other side, and now that system, because it's the only other system that should have that secret key, can check that hash and verify that none of the data was changed in transit. So we have a way to secure our data while it's being transmitted. We have a way to authenticate all the packets. Where we're what we haven't covered yet or fixed is the beginning of this session. How do we do that initial authentication? Are you in fact who I think you are? How do we set up a secure channel over this insecure medium? Those are the problems we still need to go through and talk about and address this week. So when it comes to setting up a secure channel over an insecure medium, the technology we leverage is referred to as asymmetrical encryption. You'll also hear it referred to as public key cryptography. They're the same thing, just two different names. And with symmetric key, we said there's one key that encrypts and decrypts. Asymmetrical is much harder math. Let me just kind of describe it that way for now. And what we generate is not a key that's used to encrypt and decrypt, but two keys with a dedicated task. One key is designed to encrypt the data only. The other key is designed to do decryption only. The key that can do the encryption, we refer to that as the public key. So what that means is if someone needs to send me a secure message, I can send them my public key. They can encrypt it with my public key. And the only thing that can decrypt it is my private key. So as long as I keep my private key safe, I'm the only one that'll ever be able to go through and open up that information. So this is kind of cool, right? We talked about insecure medium. How do we deal with that? Well, that public key can only encrypt. So if I send it to you, so you can send me a secure message, and let's say Bill's sitting in the middle and he's trying, when he grabs a copy of that public key as it goes by as well, it doesn't do him any good. That key can only encrypt the data. It cannot decrypt. The only thing that can is my private key. The downside of it, and I'll go back into this a little bit later, it's CPU intensive. So we can't really rely on this for all of our VPN security needs because it's going to add a lot of latency to the packets as they go by. The only time we tend to use asymmetric encryption by itself is when we're dealing with store and forward messaging. So if you think email, right? If I send you an email and it takes a minute to get to you instead of 10 seconds, you're not going to notice the difference. But if I send you a packet and that packet takes a second to get to you instead of 15 milliseconds, you're definitely going to start noticing that, right? So asymmetric can't fix everything for us, but it can at least can create that secure channel over an insecure medium. It's also susceptible to initial man-in-the-middle attacks. What do I mean by that? Well, remember I said if Bill puts himself in the middle and I send you my public key so you can encrypt data and send it to me, if Bill gets a copy of that public key as well, it doesn't do him any good. He can't decrypt the data with the public key. But what if Bill changes his attack methodology a little bit? Let's say I go to send you my public key, and then Bill is able to grab that and then throw his public key over his shoulder to you, and neither one of us noticed that Bill interrupted the key transfer. Well, what just happened? Well, now Bill has a copy of my public key. You have a public key you think is mine, but it's actually Bill's. So when you go in and you encrypt your data using that public key, that's Bill's public key. So now if you transmit the data, if Bill can interrupt that as well, it was encrypted with his public key. He can use his private key to open it up. He can read the message. He can change it. You send me a message that says, "Hey, Chris, thanks for the Fireside Fridays. I thought they were awesome." And Bill changes it to, "Chris, you're a pain in the ass, and I hate having to listen to you every week." And then he sends it off, and then he re-encrypts it with my public key, sends it off to me. Since it was my public key that encrypted it, my private key can open it. And now I open the message thinking you flamed me. And with the technology we've discussed so far, there's no way to detect that this took place. So while asymmetric encryption can set up a secure channel over an insecure medium, it is still susceptible to initial man-in-the-middle attack. In other words, we need to get initial authentication right. If we don't do that, the whole thing, basically, we're working with dominoes, is what this comes down to. And if you knock down the first domino, all the dominoes fall apart after that, right? Like, let's say what you sent me was a symmetrical key so we could switch over and use, AES 512 encryption for sending data back and forth. Well, again, Bill interrupted that. Bill saw that key. So now when we switch over and use AES encryption instead, Bill can decrypt all of that stuff anytime he wants to. So that's what I mean by it's a series of dominoes. If you get initial authentication wrong, that falls over, and now asymmetric can't be trusted. If asymmetric falls over, now we can't have faith in symmetrical key. We can't have faith in the HMAC that takes place. So it all falls down one after another. So essentially, a TLS tunnel is needed first, or Bill is still in control. Yeah, well, even with the TLS tunnel, Bill might be in control. We'll get into that a little bit more as we go through. There's a rabbit hole we need to go down and kind of shine a flashlight on a little bit. One of the other cool things about asymmetric encryption or public key cryptography is that it can also be used to create hash values to validate information. So remember we talked about hashing and how one of the strengths of hashing is that I can hash it, you can hash it, and we'll end up with the same hash. And now we know we both have the same thing. But we said, well, that's not really useful for a VPN because now somebody could change something and we wouldn't be able to tell. So we just said we're going to use HMAC instead. And HMAC is just a hash plus a secret only you and I know about. And now we run that and the data through that hash algorithm. And now we have a signature that you can't reproduce without that secret key. So we talked about, that's a way we could go through and authenticate every packet going by. Well, there's actually similar built into asymmetric encryption. I can go through and sign something with my private key, and the hash I generate can be validated by the public key. So the public key can't create it. All it can do is verify that that hash was created by my private key. Now, here's the problem. This is a pass-fail test. So let's say I send you a message and it has a hash in it, and you use my public key to verify that, and the verification fails. That could be you think you have my public key, you actually have somebody else's. It could be my private key wasn't used to hash it. It could be somebody changed some of that data while it was in transit as it went by. It could be there were some CRC errors due to sunspots, around the northern lights at that moment. In other words, it's a pass. You know if it's good or if it's bad, but if it's bad, you don't know why, right? It can't, the public key won't tell you, oh, this is incorrect because it wasn't signed with Chris's, key. No, you don't know. You don't know. So we know if it's good or not, but if it's not, we don't necessarily know why, just with the key information that we have in front of us. Cool. So if we kind of think this through, right? Let's say we both go through and generate our own public and private keys. Then we send a copy of our public keys to each other. Now, when I want to send you data, I can encrypt it using your public key, and then I can sign it using my private key. When that data gets to you, you can check that hash to make sure that data is valid using my public key. And if the hash is valid, now you can use your private key to open up and read the plain text message. So we have a way to go through and set up a secure channel over an insecure medium. Now, this still rests on those public keys being right. Again, if Bill gets in the middle, starts grabbing people's public keys, throwing his out instead, this whole thing falls apart. So we still got the domino problem, but we at least have something that can be mathematically proven to allow us to set up a secure channel over an insecure medium. So again, yeah, actually, I just talked through all this. So there's a couple of problems with this, though. One is we kind of, so let's say we know we can't use asymmetric encryption, right? We're going to be streaming data back and forth. It's going to be too CPU intensive. So we're going to use asymmetric to get started, but then we're going to go through and we want to switch over to symmetrical key encryption. So that kind of begs the question, okay, so I want to use asymmetric to start the session, and I'm going to use that to secure the secret key in order to switch over to symmetrical key encryption. What process should we use for that? Well, we get a couple of possibilities. One possibility is that I just create a secret key and I use your public key to encrypt it, and then I send it to you. And now you can use your private key, open it up. You now see that secret value that I generated, and bang, now we can switch over and use AES or whatever to go through and start encrypting data as it goes back and forth. That will work. Couple of problems. One is there's some predefined roles here, right? Like who gets to create that key? Who's responsible for creating a decent value? What are the parameters around that? The other is we're transmitting the key, and unless we've exchanged public keys both ways, there's no way to go through and validate that, right? In other words, I send you my public key, you create a symmetrical key. You encrypt it with my public key, my private key can open it up. Well, unless I have your public key as well, I have no way to validate that that information wasn't changed in transit or keys didn't get changed or something along those lines. So it works, but there's still some limitations around trying to do it that way. Now, as far as asymmetric goes, most of these you probably heard of before. RSA is one of the oldest ones. In fact, fun fact. So RSA is the first letter of the last name of the three folks that went through and wrote asymmetric encryption. And they were given a patent on asymmetric encryption using a public and a private key to encrypt things instead of a symmetrical key methodology. The truth is they didn't create it, right? They wrote this and they got their patent in like the mid 70s, but they didn't actually create it. The really smart folk, the really smart Brits that were working on cryptography back in World War II, they came up with this already. So asymmetric encryption was actually created back in the late 30s. But because it was such strong encryption, it was labeled as top secret and it wasn't allowed out. So it took 30 plus years for the rest of the world to catch up with the work that was being done by the cryptographers that were involved with World War II over in Great Britain. I think that's pretty amazing, pretty wild. So yeah, so RSA is accredited with creating this. Turns out, yeah, no, not so much. But how does it work? Right? Like we create a public key and a private key. How does it work? It all kind of works around prime numbers, or more accurately described as numbers we're pretty certain are prime. And what's involved with factoring numbers when you multiply two big primes together, right? So like if I take 3 and 11, which are both prime numbers, that creates 33. How hard is it to figure out what numbers were used to generate that value 33? That's where a lot of the strength in this math comes from. Now, 33, yeah, you can figure that out in your head, right? But we're only talking about 2 digits maximum. When we talk about the prime numbers used in RSA, they're literally hundreds of digits long. So we're talking about really, really, really big prime numbers that are being used. And again, this is that whole process of generating that public and that private key. Elliptical curve encryption is very similar to RSA, but it's a little bit more optimized and streamlined, so it's less of a CPU hit. So RSA, has been used for a long time. It's kind of getting phased out now. We're moving more towards elliptical curve type of algorithms for doing public-private key. And then there's Diffie-Hellman. Diffie-Hellman isn't so much a way to create your public-private keys, although it does include that in the spec, but it's more focused on creating a symmetrical key without one side holding that responsibility. In other words, what the beauty that Diffie-Hellman defines is rather than having one person figure out what symmetrical key we should use and send it to the person on the other side, how to negotiate that in a clear channel that anybody could sniff and do it in a secure fashion. Here's an example of that. And I've tried to keep it so for the crypto weenies in the audience, I'm going to piss you off. And I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm taking some liberties with some of this and I'm simplifying it a lot more than it really truly is. But my goal is, excuse me, for the average security person that kind of needs to know how this stuff works, but is never going to be charged with writing math to do this themselves. I want to be able to give you enough information that you understand how it works without dragging us down the math, rabbit trail, which is going to yawn a lot of people out and they're going to fall asleep, and that wouldn't be good. So in a nutshell, here's how Diffie-Hellman works. So we've got two individuals, Alice and Bob. Alice and Bob want to exchange information with each other, and they want to do it in a secure fashion. And they want to use a secure algorithm like Blowfish to do that. Well, Blowfish is a symmetrical key algorithm. It uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt. So Alice and Bob are going to need to know some value that only they know about and nobody else knows about in order to use Blowfish properly and secure their data as they go through. So in order to come up with that symmetrical key value, they're going to go through a little bit of a handshake exchange. So the first thing they do is they generate a private key for themselves. This is done, on their system. It's not transmitted anywhere else. So Alice generates one we're going to call capital X. Bob generates one that we're going to call capital Y. So now they both have a private key value that is known only to them. Now that they've created that key, Alice and Bob then go through and they negotiate two numbers, P and G. What are P and G? P and G are prime numbers. P is a really, 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 really big prime number. G is just a really, really, really big prime number. But we've got these two numbers, P and G, that they've agreed on. They've decided these are nice, pretty numbers that we're going to go through and use. Then what they do is they go through and they generate a public key. And to generate the public key, they use their own private key, X, to generate that value. So in my original description, I said that the public and private key is mathematically related, but they're not equal to each other. This is what I meant by that. We're deriving the public key off of that. And in fact, if you want an idea of what stuff like this looks like, if you don't have IT tools, this is an awesome toolkit. I have this running on one of my servers. It's got a lot of really useful tools in it. It runs inside of a Docker instance. But hey, let's go in and let's just generate an RSA key pair. And here you go. So this is a 2048-bit long key pair. This is the public key. This is the private key. Um, make it a little smaller. Let's say we want to do 1024 for some reason. Here you go. But you can see that they're not that different from each other, right? The private key is a little bit longer, but they're not that different from each other. And that public key gets generated based on the information that's inside of the private key. So that's what I mean by they're mathematically related to each other, but they're not equal to each other. So Alice's private key, along with the prime number and the generator number, are used to calculate A. A is Alice's public key. Bob does the same thing, only we're going to label his public key lowercase b. Now they exchange those public keys with each other. So if we look at what can be seen on the network, this untrusted network, what could somebody sniff and potentially say? Well, they could see the negotiation for P&G. They can see what the value of P&G ends up being. That's all negotiated in the clear. They can see each person's public key. Those go by in the clear. This is why quantum computing is a problem for security, encryption, computing, power, and man in the middle. So it's not so much it's a problem of man in the middle as it is a problem about CPU resources, right? So I mentioned like, the RSA keys when I was showing those. This one's 1024-bit. This one's, 2048-bit. What does that mean? Well, that's how big the key value is that we're generating. The bigger the key value, the more possibilities that are available for each potential key, the longer it's going to take you to guess all of those possibilities. As an example, for the longest time, we used something called desencryption, written by someone that Bill and I actually got the benefit of being able to work with, Robert Morris Sr. Desencryption used a 56-bit key. At the time Morris wrote desencryption back in the 70s, 56-bit was like, this is going to take someone 100 years to crack it. But by the time you got into like the late 90s, the early 2000s, CPUs had become fast enough that to go through all the possible potential key values in 56-bit DES key might only take you a day if you had some decent computer resources. So that's why we had to stop using it. So the problem with quantum computing, without going too far down that road, is that our CPUs today kind of process things in a linear fashion, right? Let me try this key. Oh, that didn't work. Let me try this key value. Nope, that didn't work. Let me try this key value. Nope, that didn't work. Quantum can try many, many possibilities all at the same time, and then try and do some error correction to see which one might actually be it. So it's the fact that processing is done completely differently that we need to worry about quantum in the future, versus anything else. That's a total side conversation, so I don't want to go any deeper down that rabbit hole than that. So, but back to Diffie-Hellman. So each side has generated a private key. They've negotiated P&G between them. Anybody could see that in the clear. They then used P&G plus their own private key to generate a public key for each side, lowercase a over here, lowercase b over here, exchanged that in clear text over the internet so anybody could potentially see that. And then what they do is they take their own private key plus both public keys plus the prime number plus the generator number, blend it for 2 minutes, cook it at 350 for an hour, and what comes out the other side is a secret key value. And through the magic that is Diffie-Hellman, even though the private keys aren't the same on both sides, they will derive the same secret key value. So we now have a value known to both sides of the connection that no one else can figure out because no one in the middle was able to see either one of the private keys. So now we've negotiated what secret key to use. Now, like I said, we can switch over, and which one did I call out? Blowfish. We can now switch over and use Blowfish encryption to use symmetrical key cryptography to protect our data as it goes back and forth. And now, neither one of us had designated roles. We don't have to worry about one side picking, horrible to use secret key values that are too short or whatever the case may be. This is all part of a negotiation. Yeah, Robert Morris Sr., father of war men. Yeah. So Robert Morris Jr. was actually a pretty cool dude. I actually got an opportunity to meet him as well. Um, this was so Robert Morris Sr. was, you can look up his bio. The guy was amazingly brilliant. Um, that casts a big shadow. And sometimes sons do things they don't think through completely to try and get out of the shadow that dad is casting. That's really what that's my interpretation of what happened with the Morris worm. He wasn't trying to do anything bad. He was actually trying to patch things. This was his way to figure out what systems were vulnerable and let's get a patch on. He just underestimated how quickly this thing would propagate over the internet and how many instances may potentially run on any given system at a given time. Um, but yeah, the two of them are father and son. Cool. So now we have symmetrical keys. Awesome. So let's kind of step back. Where are we right now? So right now we have asymmetric encryption. We have a way to set up a secure channel over an insecure medium. We can use Diffie-Hellman to generate a secret key value that'll allow us to switch over to symmetrical key encryption and use that to protect our data as it goes back and forth. We can use HMAC to authenticate every single packet sent in both directions so that we know our data isn't getting changed or anything along those lines. So far, so good. The only thing we're still missing is initial authentication. And again, like I said, dominoes, we got to make sure we get initial authentication right. Because if we don't, as good as all this technology is, it becomes useless if we can't trust initial authentication. So what are our possibilities? Well, one possibility is just use a password. I've seen vendors do this in the past. I've seen vendors that have decided, hey, we're smart. Let's write our own encryption algorithm and we'll create our own VPN product. And this was their way of doing initial authentication was just, hey, use a shared secret that everybody knows about. Well, there's a couple problems here. One is you're using this shared password everywhere. So if one system gets compromised, everything is now compromised. The other problem is it's a pain to change that value, right? If we decide, hey, we want to change this password every 3 months just to make sure that, if it gets cracked, we're not in trouble and blah, 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 or whatever. Well, to change over, everybody's got to change at the same time. So this is easy for developers to deploy. It's a pain in the ass for network administrators to manage on a daily basis, right? This is the developers taking the easy way out, if you will. So avoid this one if you can. Other possibilities we've seen are things like this, right? So think about the first time you log into an SSH server. What happens? You get a message similar to this, right? The authentication of the host you're connecting to can't be established. Here's its fingerprint. Do you want to continue? Right? We've all seen this, right? What does this mean? What's going on? So here's what's happening. The server is using whatever algorithm is identified. In this case here, it's SHA-256 to hash the public key for that SSH system. This is a hash of that public key. So what's happening here is we're basically being told, hey, this is the hash of the public key of the server you're trying to connect to. I'm leaving it to you, the human, to verify if this is okay. And now what's supposed to happen is we're supposed to contact the admin and say, hey, admin, do me a favor, run something like this so that it prints out all the keys. And I'm trying to connect up using the ECDSA algorithm. So go find the ECDSA algorithm and read off this hash value to me, all 256 characters of it, 3P capital I, 3P capital I. Okay, that's right. P uppercase Q, P uppercase Q. You get the idea. And now if those values match, I know I'm connecting to the right system. Okay. Show of hands. How many people validate that hash when they log into an SSH system? I'm going to go out. So I'll be the first to raise my hand and say, I rarely do it. And I'm wrong. None. Yeah, right. I don't validate. -1. Yeah, exactly. So here's a method of doing initial authentication, and we don't leverage it. We don't tend to use that. So here's what I want you to do. So I am going to, oh, gee, Chris, it'd help if you got an SSH server going. No, actually, I don't want to use that one. I'm going to pick on a different one. I know, when in doubt, pick on the firewall, right? Let me pick on my firewall. Here we go. I'm going to pull my firewall up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to post into the channel uh, um, some commands I want you to run on your Linux system. And no, it's not going to be rm star. So what do these commands do? I just threw them into Discord. So, and I'm going to paste them over here. It's asking me for my password. And I think I remember the password on this. There we go. Yay. Okay. So what do we just do? Okay, this first echo command. What this echo command does is it prints what is all of the public keys for this local server. That's basically what it's doing. It's using SSH keygen. Now I could go in and I could just run SSH keygen and generate it that way. But what I wanted to do was give you a script because, hey, who always remembers the name of SSH keygen, right? And who can remember the command line switches they need to do in order to do this? Well, here's what we're doing instead. We're using the echo command to take this command that'll print out all those hashes for us, and we're redirecting that into a file that I chose to name key. If you want to give it some other descriptive name, go for it. Then what we're doing is we're making key executable. And then all I did was run that key command. So again, so now if, let's say I want to give Bill access to the server, I can go in and I can say sudo key, and I'm using // because it's in the local directory. If I move this to my path under bin someplace or someplace like that, I don't need the // anymore. But now what I can do is, so let's say Bill needs access to this server. I can drop Bill an email and say, okay, Bill, I need a copy of your public key. So you'll be able to authenticate to the server. And the server is test.foobar.com. And here are the hash values for that server. Is this on GitHub yet? No, I'm not going to be as silly as to send a one-line command onto a GitHub server. I don't think so. But now what happens is when Bill goes to log in for the first time and he sees this, in the email I sent him is a copy of the hashes. So he could just refer to that email to see if he's got a match on this or not. We can make this better, but we have to want to make it change. So again, take this key, tool, which is not on GitHub yet, that I just gave you, but leverage that. So now when you're providing access to somebody to the system, all you got to do is run this key command, copy, paste in an email, bang, you're done. And now if you put it in front of the person, they're far more likely to authenticate, right? When you log in and you see this and you don't know if it's right or not, yeah, just keep going. Yeah, I'm not going to bother. But if you know you have an email that documents whether this is right or not, people are a little bit more motivated to check it just in case. So we can do this. We can make things a little bit better. So, weaknesses here requires human interaction. But if we combine that to the process, like, hey, I got to tell you where the server is located or its IP address or whatever, so you can SSH to it in the first place, and I, need to get your public key from you and all of that. If we combine it in as part of that portion of the process, this becomes a little bit easier to go through and deal with. So that's how SSH does it. But so we've got these public keys. Are there any other ways we could maybe try and distribute them and make sure they get to the other side? Because again, our public keys are going to are part of what helps us set up a secure channel over an insecure medium. But we got to make sure that when I get your public key, it is in fact your public key. Evil Mr. Bill is not sitting in the middle swapping public keys like we talked about before. This is where digital certificates come in. So a digital certificate's job at its core is to distribute public keys and give you a way to verify if that public key is correct or not. In other words, it gives you a way to verify that, hey, if www.fubar.com says this is its public key, is that actually the right server? Is that actually the key associated with that system? That's what it's designed for at its end. Pay no attention to the man behind the router. Yeah, that's Bill. That's Bill. So that is the job of digital certificates. It's an initial authentication of that public key. So what's a digital certificate look like? Okay, we're going to play pretend for a minute. Close your eyes and think of a digital certificate as a plaque on the wall for a second, right? Let's make this physical and visual. So on that plaque of the wall is the name of the system this digital certificate was issued to. So like www.fubar.com. This is the server that this digital certificate has been issued to. Now, it's possible to use wildcards, meaning the digital certificate could be issued to star.fubar.com. And now that means this digital certificate could be used for every single server within that environment. Of course, that also means every single server is using the same public-private key pair, which also means if any one of those servers get compromised, everything else gets compromised too. But that gets into, should you be using wildcards or not? That's another side conversation. So for now, what's at the top of this plaque on the wall is www.fubar.com. And then underneath that is the OU. Who is the organization behind that? Fubar Corp or whoever it happens to be. Where are they located? That type of information. So we have information that is specific to the organization that ultimately holds responsibility for that particular web server. Then after that, so next on that plaque on the wall is who issued this digital certificate. And not just the entity, but what server generated this digital certificate. That's going to get identified as well. After that, we're going to identify when was this digital certificate issued? When does it expire? Because we don't want it to be good forever, right? Somebody might steal it. And if they steal it, everything becomes compromised after that. So we want to have some expiration, maybe 2 years out or whatever the case may be. So there's an issue date and there's an expiration date. That's all on this plaque on the wall. Next after that is a copy of the public key for www.fubar.com, the server to which this digital certificate has been issued to. So we've got the public key value right there. And then after that is a hash value. And the hash value was generated using the private key of the server that issued this digital certificate. Well, remember what we said. If I encrypt something with my if I hash something with my private key, public key can check that, right? So we've digitally signed this digital certificate, created a hash using the private key. So there's a method available to go through and validate, is this digital certificate okay? Did anybody try and change it? Whatever the case may be. So we got that hash created by that private key. So how do you validate that digital certificate? Well, you see who issued the digital certificate. That's right there. You see the hash value. So all you need to do is go to the issuing server, get a copy of its public key, and use that public key to check the hash. Because as we said, the public key can check the hash created by the private key. Once you check the hash, you know everything's okay. Oh, wait a minute, Chris. You got that. You got the issuing server's public key. How do you know that public key is okay? Because what you actually got was not just the issuing server's public key, you got the issuing server's digital certificate that was signed by a secondary issuing server. So all you need to do is get the secondary issuing server's public key, use that to check the hash of the private key. That's okay. Well, how do I know that public key is okay? Because that was, you guessed it, signed by yet another server. Go get that server's public key, check the hash, it's okay. How do I know that public key is okay? Because that was issued by this other server over here. Go get its digital certificate, get its public key, check the hash, it's okay. How do I know that digital certificate is okay? Because that system said I'm a trustworthy system. I signed my own key. Don't worry about it. Whoa, wait, right? Wait. Think about this process, right? When we went to verify the web server we were trying to talk to, we had math, right? If we're not sure if this is a secure connection, right? Like, let's say Keith and I have a disagreement about whether this is secure or not. We have math to fall back on. We can look at this logically. We can go through the math and come to a hopefully similar determination as to whether this is a secure session or not. So we had math. When we check out the issuing server, we have math. The next one, math. But the last server at the bottom of the rabbit hole, it says, trust me because I said so. Well, that's not math. That's warm fuzzy, right? So now instead of math, we need to, sit in a circle, cross our legs, sing kumbaya, and talk about our feelings and decide, how do we feel about this last server? Do we feel it's secure? And Keith may feel completely differently than me, and there's no way to break that tie, right? Because we're talking about emotions. We're talking about feelings that are based on past life experiences. Maybe Keith has seen a lot of servers broken into over his time. So he's like, oh, no way, I'm trusting that thing just because it told me to. And, I was raised sheltered. So I'm like, oh, I trust everybody who says they're trustworthy. They couldn't tell, they wouldn't lie to me. So I trust it and he doesn't. And there's no math to prove which one of us might be right. It's warm, fuzzy only. So when we talk about a certificate authority, right? They are typically a trusted third party system. So when we talk about trusting them, yeah, you have to trust them because at the bottom of the rabbit hole is warm, fuzzy kumbaya. There's no math. So that's why there are standards that are created around, what minimum requirements should be met in order to be considered a trusted certificate authority. Because you don't have math all the way down the rabbit hole. There's some level of warm fuzzy to this whole thing. Now, we've got some implementation challenges that are part of this whole thing. One is what we just talked about. That last server, warm fuzzy, right? If they're, digitally signing their own cert and then, pulling the hard drive out of the system and then locking it in a bunker 50 feet under the ground with, lasers and nuclear trip bombs and, rats running around that are armed with Uzis. Okay, that might be a fairly secure system, right? Whereas somebody else just says, oh, well, we don't hook that server up to the internet all the time. I'm not going to feel as secure about that, right? So again, it's that warm fuzzy about what they do with that. That's an emotional hurdle that needs to get passed in order to be a trusted certificate authority. And there's just no math to fix that with what we figured out so far. So that's the first. The other is that I talked about that chain, right? I talked about like 4 levels deep of digital certificates until you get to the warm fuzzy. The reality is we don't do that. We check the first level only. So when someone goes to your website and says, oh, are you trustworthy? Let me go get the issuing server's digital certificate and check that. Oh, that verifies? Okay, I'm happy now. I'm not going to go check server 2 and server 3 and server 4. I'm going to stop at the very first certificate authority server. So even though that rabbit hole is there, we don't even try to go down it. We go, please don't mention this. Okay. While encryption, decryption are very heavily related, but should the emphasis be on secure decryption, checking CRC, et cetera? Yeah, well, it's both sides are important, right? The validity of who's creating this information versus being able to verify that on the back end, both of those are just as important. Absolutely. So yeah, we don't even do that check. This also kind of comes down to like, so what's a certificate authority? What's actually required to become a certificate authority? I mentioned there are RFCs around that. There's best practices. There are minimum requirements. But is that really what defines a certificate authority? Not necessarily. And give me a couple of slides to explain why. So before we talk more about that, the next thing I wanted to cover too is self-signed certificates. So let's say I set up a web server on my home network and I don't trust my Bengal cat who likes to bite me to not sniff traffic on the local network. So I want to encrypt it. So I'm going to set up a web server and I want to use TLS to communicate with it. Well, the proper way to do that would be to go out and buy a third-party trusted that digital certificate and use that to protect my public key when people go to connect to it. So now my Bengal kitty won't be able to go in and sniff any of that traffic. But let's say if I buy that, that's fewer toys I can buy for her to distract her so that she won't bite me as often. So I don't want to pay the $50 to whoever to go through and get that digital certificate. I could choose to create my own. So on the web server, I can go through and I can say, hey, I want to create that public-private key pair, and I want to create a digital certificate for this system. I effectively want to self-sign my own certificate. Can you do that? Yes, you can. Now, a couple of challenges here. Challenge number one is people are going to get this when they connect to it, right? Not secure. What does that mean? All that means is we can't validate the initial authentication. Because this is not a recognized certificate authority, because you signed this yourself, I have no way to verify whether the certificate's okay. So I'm just going to ask you me, and you know what happens when we assume, right? You make an ass of you and see me. We don't want to do that. So, so what that means is if we're using a self-signed cert, that initial authentication isn't there because there's no way to validate the digital certificate, but it will switch over and it will create a secure data stream in order to go through and protect the data after that. So someone could still do a digital certificate swap or something like that. But if that doesn't happen, if all I'm worried about is my Bengal kitty sniffing traffic on the local network, everything the Bengal kitty is going to see is encrypted. They're not going to be able to see any of the plain text. So they won't see that I'm thinking of trading them in for a dog or, whatever communications I'm holding through that session at the time. So you can self-sign this stuff. So what does your certificate authority look like? So like these digital certificates, how do we know what is a trusted third party? We said the specs around that, right? Oh, so is this something like Anna keeps track of who are, trusted third-party certificate authorities? No. What makes them a certificate authority is it's pre-programmed into your operating system. So try this. If you're on Windows, run cert mgr and just hit enter. And when you do, you got to have admin access. So it'll pop up and say, hey, do you want admin access to run this? Tell it yes. And then when you do, go to trusted root certificate authorities, and then look under certificates and you'll see this list here. Scroll down until you see Microsoft root authority. Double click it. So the digital certificate that anchors the root authority from Microsoft servers, who is that issued by? Themselves, right? Issued to Microsoft root authority from Microsoft root authority. Wait a minute, Chris, isn't that a self-signed cert? Yeah, it is. Well, I thought third-side certs were trusted. Well, self-signed certs aren't trusted because the certificate you generated on your web server isn't pre-programmed into Certificate Manager. You can actually take that digital certificate that was created on that web server, install it through Certificate Manager on your system, and now you will no longer get this error message anymore. So by installing your cert there, that'll take care of that problem. So here's what Microsoft did. Microsoft said, hey, we control the operating system. So we're going to sign our own damn certs and just put them in as trustworthy. That's it. That's all they had to do. Bang. This is now a trusted cert if you happen to be on a Windows platform. So if you do sniffing stuff, try this sometime. Go in and run Zeek, right? And when you run Zeek, one of the things you can tweak Zeek to do is to validate digital certificates. This is an awesome function. I use this all the time. So what Zeek will do is it'll watch all the TLS sessions going by, and Zeek will use the certificate authority built into the Linux system that it's running on to see if it can validate these digital certificates. And you'll notice something interesting. When Windows systems go to pat, if you go to www.microsoft.com, that will appear to be a valid digital certificate from the perspective of Zeek. But when that Windows systems goes to install patches, it'll report that as an invalid digital certificate that was self-signed. And the reason why is this, because Microsoft has access to their own certificate authority on Windows and just installed their certs and said, hey, are you going to deal with this? But they can't do that in Linux. They can't do that on BSD. They can't do that on Mac. So if you look at that session from any non-Windows system, it knows not to trust it. But Windows has been told, oh, go ahead and trust it because Microsoft said it so. So where am I going with this? So we have standards around what you need to achieve in order to be considered a trusted certificate authority. But if you have access to someone's registry, you can circumvent that no problem. Now, maybe Microsoft has chosen to follow all of those best practices, maybe not. What I'm getting at is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because since they have write access to your registry, or like you have with the certificate management tool, it doesn't matter. They can just install their cert as trusted and problem solved. And you have no way of really knowing that happened. You have no way of knowing, oh, this is trusted based on a new cert that was just installed on your system. You never get that error message type of thing. If you want to view the certs on a Linux system, here's an awk command you can use to go through and do that. This will pump it through less, so this will just give you a page worth of information, and you can just keep paging through to look for all of it. If you want to search for something, with the less command, you just go in and you hit the backslash key, and then you type in the characters, case sensitive, that you want to search for, and it'll search through all the output to go looking for whatever it is you want. But this is how to go through and find that on a Linux system. If browsers will usually let you view the digital certificate of the server that you're connected to at the time. And for Chrome, it depends on whether the digital certificate is valid or not on what the steps are, right? Like you start off by clicking on the lock icon. If it's a secure connection, it will tell you connection is secure and you want to click on that. But if it's not secure, it's going to give you certificate details right away, and you just click on that. So basically, click the lock icon, look for these things, and just keep clicking until you get to the digital certificate. And you can go through and view what it's looking for there. Okay, so where are we at? We have digital certificates that we can use for initial authentication. Should we trust them or not? Some level of that comes down to warm and fuzzy. TLS is used pretty extensively today. So as a community, we've decided to hold our nose and say, yeah, I guess I'll kind of trust this. So that's our initial authentication. Secure channel over at Insecure Medium, Diffie-Hellman, and algorithms like it. We can go through and negotiate a secret value that only each endpoint that keeps their private keys private can derive. And that allows us to switch over and use a symmetrical key algorithm like AES to secure the data as it flows back and forth. We can then use HMAC to authenticate every packet as it goes back and forth. So next week, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about SSH, we're going to talk about IPsec, and we'll talk about TLS. And what you'll note, these are VPN technologies. And what you'll notice is all of them have these four components to it. So when we talk about building a VPN or we talk about a VPN, these four things have to be there. So like I said, we'll talk about those next week. and you won't need to set anything up for that for the next week. We'll be pretty much ready to go. It's just going to be mostly lecture. I am going to get into some SSH stuff, although not as deeply as Bill does in some of his classes. But just as a quick wrap up, I do want to say thank you for coming out to these. Um, these are framed as free webcasts. They're not. This is an hour plus of your life that you dedicated to come to listen to this. It's cost you your time. I hope we've made that time worthwhile. So, and with that said, I'll go back on video. Bill, Keith, do we got anything else we want to toss out there?
We sure do. We have a new repository up on GitHub. Chris, the link is over in Discord.
And what is in that repository?
It's a piece of code by a gentleman that I know and trust who just happens to have put out a new piece of software, and the repository is already up before the webcast was over. It's scrolling off the screen a little bit, but it's SSH_key verification because somebody asked if you had a repository for this yet.
Oh, for my one-line command? Yeah.
Yes, you do now. It's even got comments. I'm impressed. Radis, my hat is off to you. Well done.
Yep. That's when you know you're hardcore, when you have more comments than lines of code, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I agree. I totally trust Radis as well. So good dude.
Great. If you've got questions, feel free to ask them over on Discord. We a lot of bright people in here.
Yep.
It goes far beyond what the three of us who happen to have cameras can provide. So please ask them over on Discord.
Yeah. That you may ever want to listen to. Yes.
Too true. Absolutely. All right.
Cool. And I think I came up with a way to break SSH. I don't know for sure. I'm asking Bill to do some research for me.
We'll do some checks. Absolutely.
Yeah. I've got a feeling it'll work.
Okay. We'll see.
So I'm 50-50 public private key. But if you're using passwords to authenticate with an SSH server, I'm pretty certain this will work. So
just the thing that you mentioned this morning is more about authenticating the host key.
Yes.
That gets done before there's any question about whether you're using passwords or one-time passwords or public private key pairs.
Oh yeah,
that's
that's true.
That's after we've
that's true.
The host.
So, except that if I'm able to break the connection from the beginning, I have a method of seeing the password the account is using. If we're using public private keys, it's a challenge that comes back that needs to get signed by the private key. That's the one I'm a little less certain about. So so basically, Bill, I need your expertise. So why is Bill figuring this out better than me? Bill, I told him this morning, Bill is the only one I know that can talk to an SSH server using Netcat. And I am not making that up. I watched him do it. So Bill is one of the few people in the world who can run Netcat and talk to an SSH server and create a secure connection to it.
Hey, thanks, guys. So sorry it's kind of coming out vague at the moment. We'll chat some more when we've got some.
This is one of those things that, if it works, we'll only talk about it if there's a way to fix it.
Oh yeah.
If there's not a way to fix it, then maybe we tell Black Hills and nobody else.
Yeah, exactly. It came from a previous conference that we had where we just talking about AC Hunter, and so I like to wear this every once in a while to show where the product that we sell, but we're not here to do mostly sales pitches. We're here to share good information.
Yeah. Oh, I see a question. When do we go down the rabbit hole of rainbow tables? I've got the slides for a later fireside for that. I'm gonna go talk about host-based security, and part of that is going to be password cracking. So as part of password cracking, that's when I'll talk about rainbow table stuff. It makes more sense there versus when you're talking about VPNs.
Sounds great. Hey, thank you, everybody. It's really fun to spend our afternoon with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and thank you, Chris. That was a really interesting dive that actually, it made me kind of rethink things I'm comfortable with. You know what I mean? You know, the
Keith,
things that
you
we
know I
just,
like making you uncomfortable. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. But you know what I mean, though. You know, we just take things as standards, and yeah, that's just the way it works. And this was really enlightening for me, at least, to kind of
awesome.
rethink, you know, what we trust. Uh, so,
Yeah, well, so to me, risk is okay if it's an informed decision to accept it, right? Like, yeah, I used to do ice racing. I used to love going out in a frozen lake, throwing the car sideways, and race around and hit 100 miles an hour on the backstretch and the whole fit. But that was an informed decision. I know the risks of driving on a frozen lake. I chose to take those risks. That's okay. It's when you drive on a frozen lake and don't understand what the risks are involved with that that's when things go bad. Um, Kafkar asked a question that I want to make sure we hit. The encryption is layered. Those methods from that slide are encapsulated and upward according to OSI, so therefore protected. Have you have time to explain? Okay. So I think where this is going is how much actually gets protected when you run it through a VPN? And the answer is, wait for it. This one's going to shock you. It depends. It depends upon what we're working with for an algorithm. So, for example, when we talk about, let's say, TLS secures the data. It doesn't necessarily secure anything within the IP headers themselves. If we talk about IPsec, now it depends on whether you're using AH or ESP, which are subcomponents of IPsec. If we're using ESP, that's validating everything from the transport layer up. But if you're using AH, it'll actually fail if you try and change the IP addresses. So AH doesn't work if you go through a NAT address because it's trying to go through that. So what none of them ever touch, though, is layer 2. So so if you're using like the best VPN out there, what's still insecure? Layer 2. That's someplace people can still go in and mess around. Now they can mess around with the layer 2 information, right? If they, let's say, capture packets they shouldn't see by doing trickery at layer 2, they can't change the transport layer because that still is getting protected by the VPN that's running on top of the whole thing. So that is an awesome question. What actually does get protected? Don't mention that model in front of John Strand. He gets upset. Actually, the best way is, so if you're in a John Strand class and you want to annoy him, the best way to tick him off is to compliment him. Right? Come on, guys, say nice things to John about John to John, and that's the easiest way to make him uncomfortable.
yeah. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, people may think you're joking, but that's actually effective.
You could there's been times I've told John, dude, you're acting like a fucking idiot, and he's totally fine with that. But I'll say, dude, you do so much good for the community. He's just like, go the fuck away, leave me alone. I don't want to talk about that. Don't say nice things about me. I don't know how to deal with that. Called him legend and he went off. Oh yeah, definitely. Calling him a legend or a goat will definitely set John off. Absolutely. But he means it honestly. He's like the rest of us in that, hey, this stuff I know, but this stuff I don't know. Nobody knows it all, and that's okay. So do you think he thinks you're being condescending? So I've known John almost as long as I've known Bill. So when I say nice things about him, he knows I'm not being condescending. He knows how much I believe in the stuff that he's doing. So there's no way he could ever take what I say to him as being condescending or negative in any way. He just honestly cannot comfortably take a compliment about anything. So.
And on that note.
Yes. So after all that helpful information on how to piss off John Strand, I think we're done for the day. Our work here is done.
Yeah.
Got to get your priorities right.
Exactly.
Well, I definitely want to thank everyone in our Discord Threat Hunter community I mean, you guys and gals, you're just so awesome, and we really appreciate you. And also, we see all the thank yous you're putting in there, and we not only appreciate it, it humbles us, and we thank you for that, and we thank
Yep.
you for joining us. So,
Yeah, John is not necessarily the only person who doesn't know how to take a compliment. So,
Too
yeah.
true. Too true. All right, guys.
all
Thanks
right,
again.
everybody, have a safe weekend. We'll see you next
Cool.
Friday. We will go on
Awesome.
to part 3 of VPNs next Friday.